Welcome. In this video, we'll take a look at glycolysis. We're just going to introduce it in this video, so this will be short, I think. All right. So we just focused on redox reactions. In this video, we'll think about about aerobic cellular respiration. We're going to break this down and study it bit by bit. This video focuses on glycolysis, an introduction to it. So cellular respiration can be summarized by saying that in living organisms, a nutrient like glucose or sugar or something like that. So let's put in a nutrient. I don't know why I sometimes get that line drawn in there, but whatever. A nutrient like glucose is oxidized to carbon dioxide, while oxygen is reduced to water. Yep, we saw that in the last presentation. This process is stepwise, lots of steps. It's complicated, yep, and it requires many enzymes. And finally, it makes a lot of ATP for the cell, so that the cell can do its work. We break cellular respiration into three major steps or components. Our textbook actually sometimes calls it four. The first step is called glycolysis, and then comes pyruvate oxidation and the citric acid cycle. I kind of lump those together. And finally, if you can't read that down there, it's called oxidative phosphorylation. So we're going to take a look at these steps and sort out how do our cells take the nutrients that we eat, like the bagel you had for breakfast, the nutrients in that bagel, and use those nutrients somehow, tap into them to make ATP. That's our job to figure this out. Here's a slide that I really want you to just plain old memorize. It's super helpful to kind of think about the process of aerobic cellular respiration and what's happening. I usually have students sort of just sort this out on their own. Check out this diagram and try to explain what's going on. It's tricky. I see in this diagram a mitochondrion. I'm assuming that this is like part of a cell, right? And this must be the cytoplasm or the cytosol out here. Okay. And what am I seeing? Well, here's glycolysis in blue, and then pyruvate oxidation, the citric acid cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. Those are those 3 or 4 steps of cellular respiration, right? I also see lots of ATP being made. Okay. This star is a little bit bigger. I think that means there's going to be a lot of ATP made during that step of cellular respiration. I also see some different terms down here associated with these ATPs being made. One of them is called substrate level and one is oxidative. There must be different ways to make ATP. What else do I see? Well, I see that glycolysis, this first step of cellular respiration, is happening outside of the mitochondria. And I notice that there are arrows all over the place, right? So we start with glucose. Hey, that's our nutrient that we start with. And we use it, and we kind of follow it. Look what's going on. All sorts of, kind of circular things happening here. Glycolysis seems first, and then pyruvate oxidation and the citric acid cycle, and finally oxidative phosphorylation. Along the way, we make lots of ATP, and it looks like we make this. What is these yellow boxes? Electrons via NADH, or via FADH2. Electrons that we somehow generate or move around in glycolysis and the citric acid cycle apparently are used over here in oxidative phosphorylation to help us make a lot of ATP. We're going to have to figure out what's going on. We're going to start with glycolysis. All right. Glycolysis is a complex metabolic pathway. The word actually means to break sweet. Lysis means to break, and glyco refers to sweet. To break sweet or to break sugar. Here are some bits of information that we want to write down about glycolysis before we look at its details. First of all, it occurs in almost all living things. So I'm going to write down almost all living things use glycolysis. Okay. Almost all living things use glycolysis. We see it must be a very ancient metabolic pathway. There are a few prokaryotes that use some things other than sugar to make ATP, but almost everything uses glycolysis. Second thing is, it occurs in the cytoplasm, not in the mitochondria. So it happens out in the cytoplasm, not in the mitochondria. So this part of aerobic cellular respiration is out here. Another thing we notice right away is there's no oxygen required for glycolysis. So the steps of glycolysis don't require oxygen. But we also notice that glucose, that's our starting nutrient, is partially oxidized in this process. Partially oxidized. Oh, remember that we said that cellular respiration involves involves redox reactions, and the nutrient is oxidized. Well, glucose is oxidized in glycolysis, not completely, but partially, all right? And we make, in glycolysis, we make some products. The products that we make are ATP. So these are some of the products that we make. We make something called NADH, so we'll have to sort out what that is. And we end up with, not glucose anymore, but we end up with something called pyruvate. I have to sort that out too. The process of glycolysis actually involves 10 steps, and we're going to take a look at all 10 steps, and we're going to draw them out on a whiteboard. And that's our next video. So we'll start by thinking about glycolysis now. You can use your PowerPoint presentation. I will be drawing these steps out on a whiteboard so you can see them in more detail as well. Thanks. Moving on.